Once, when I was half asleep, I had been surprised to hear the professor speak in almost a whisper, as though he was dreaming. He was talking of the clouds, the wind, and the sun. Then Pages and Burgown began to chatter with him in a foolish manner. Neither waited for the other to reply. Uncle Gaspar seemed hardly to notice how foolish they were. Were they all gone mad? What was to be done? Suddenly, I thought I would light a lamp. To economize, we had decided only to have a light when it was absolutely necessary. When they saw the light, they apparently regained their senses. I went to get some water for them. The waters were going down. After a time they began to talk strangely again. My own thoughts were vague and wild, and for long hours and perhaps days we laid there chattering to one another foolishly. After a time we became quieter, and Burgown said that before dying we should put down our last wishes. We lit a lamp and Burgown wrote for us all, and we each signed the paper. I gave my dog and harp to Mattia, and I expressed a wish for Alexix to go to Lisa and kiss her for me, and give her the dried rose that was in my vest pocket. Dear little Lisa. After some time, I slipped down the bank again, and saw that the waters were lowering considerably. I hurried back to my companions and told them that now I could swim to the ladders and tell our rescuers in what part of the mine we had taken refuge. The professor forbade me to go, but I insisted. Go on, Remi, and I'll give you my watch, cried Uncle Gaspar. The professor thought for a moment, then took my hand. Do as you think, boy, he said, you have a heart. I think that you are attempting the impossible, but it is not the first time that what was thought impossible has been successful. Kiss us, boy. I kissed the professor and Uncle Gaspar, and then, having thrown off my clothes, I went into the water. You keep shouting all the while, I said, before taking the plunge, your voices will guide me. I wondered if the space under the roof of the gallery was big enough for me to move freely. That was the question. After some strokes I found that I could swim if I went gently. I knew that there was a meeting of galleries not far away, but I had to be cautious, for if I made a mistake in the course I should lose my way. The roof and the walls of the gallery were not enough to guide me. On the ground there was a surer guide, the rails. If I followed them I should be sure to find the ladders. From time to time I let my feet go down and, having touched the iron rails, I rose up again, gently. With the voices of my companions behind me and the rails under my feet, I was not lost. As the voices became less distinct, the noise of the pumps increased. I was advancing. Thank God, I should soon see the light of day. Going straight down the middle of the gallery, I had only to turn to the right to touch the rail. I went on a little farther, then dived again to touch the rail. It was not there. I went from side to side of the gallery, but there was no rail. I had made a mistake. The voices of my companions only reached me in the faintest murmur. I took in a deep breath, then plunged again, but with no more success. There were no rails. I had taken the wrong level. Without knowing, I must have turned back. But how was it the others were not shouting? If they were, I could not hear them. I was distracted, for I did not know which way to turn in this cold, black water. Then, suddenly, I heard the sounds of voices again, and I knew which way to turn. After having taken a dozen strokes back, I turned to the right, then to the left, but only found the walls. Where were the rails? I was sure now that I was in the right level. Then I suddenly realized that the railroad had been carried away by the rush of waters, and that I had no guide. Under these circumstances it was impossible for me to carry out my plan, and I was forced to turn back. I swam back quickly to our place of refuge, the voices guiding me. As I approached, it seemed to me that my companions' voices were more assured, as though they felt stronger. I was soon at the entrance of the shaft. I hallooed to them. Come back, shouted the professor. I could not find the way, I called out. Never mind, the tunnel is nearly finished. They hear our cries and we can hear theirs. We shall soon speak. I climbed quickly up to our landing and listened. We could hear the blows from the picks, and the cries of those who worked for our freedom came to us feebly, but yet very distinct. After the first rush of joy, I realized that I was frozen. As there were no warm clothes to give me, they buried me up to the neck in coal dust, and Uncle Gaspar and the professor huddled up against me to keep me warm. We knew now that our rescuers would soon reach us through the tunnel and by the water, but these last hours of our imprisonment were the hardest to bear. The blows from the picks continued, and the pumping had not stopped for one moment. Strange, the nearer we reached the hour of our deliverance, the weaker we grew. I was lying in the coal dust trembling, but I was not cold. We were unable to speak. Suddenly, there was a noise in the waters of the gallery and, turning my head, I saw a great light coming towards us. The engineer was at the head of several men. He was the first to climb up to us. He had me in his arms before I could say a word. It was time, for my heart was failing me, yet I was conscious that I was being carried away, and I was wrapped up in a blanket after our rescuers had waded through the water in the gallery. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again it was daylight. We were in the open air. At the same time something jumped on me. It was Capi. With a bound he had sprung upon me as I laid in the engineer's arms. He licked my face again and again. Then my hand was taken, I felt a kiss and heard a weak voice murmuring, "Remi. Oh, Remi." It was Mattia. I smiled at him, then I glanced round. A mass of people were crowded together in 2 straight rows, leaving a passage down the center. It was a silent crowd, for they had been requested not to excite us by their cries, but their looks spoke for their lips. In the first row I seemed to see some white surplices and gilt ornaments which shone in the sun. They were the priests, who had come to the entrance of the mine to offer prayers for our deliverance. When we were brought out, they went down on their knees in the dust. 20 arms were stretched out to take me, but the engineer would not give me up. He carried me to the offices, where beds had been prepared to receive us. 2 days later I was walking down the village street followed by Mattia, Alexix, and Capi. There were some who came and shook me by the hands with tears in their eyes, and there were others who turned away their heads. These were in mourning, and they asked themselves bitterly why this orphan child had been saved when their fathers and sons were still in the mine, ghastly corpses, drifting hither and thither in the dark waters. Chapter 23. Once more upon the way. I had made some friends in the mine. Such terrible experiences, born in common, unites one. Uncle Gaspar and the professor, in particular, had grown very fond of me and, although the engineer had not shared our captivity, he had become attached to me like one is to a child that one has snatched from death. He invited me to his house. I had to tell his daughter all that had happened to us in the mine. Everyone wanted to keep me at Varses. The engineer told me that if I wished he would find me a position in the offices. Uncle Gaspar said he would get me a permanent job in the mine. He seemed to think it quite natural that I should return to the colliery. He himself was soon going down again with that indifference that men show who are accustomed to brave danger each day. I had no wish to go back. A mine was very interesting, and I was very pleased that I had seen one, but I had not the slightest desire to return. I preferred to have the sky over my head, even a sky full of snow. The open-air life suited me better, and so I told them. Everyone was surprised, especially the professor. Carrie, when he met me, called me a chicken. During the time that they were all trying to persuade me to stay at Varses, Mattia became very preoccupied and thoughtful. I questioned him, but he always answered that nothing was the matter. It was not until I told him that we were starting off on our tramps in 3 days' time, that he admitted the cause of his sadness. "Oh, I thought that you would stay and that you would leave me," he said. I gave him a good slap, so as to teach him not to doubt me. Mattia was quite able to look after himself now. While I was down in the mine he had earned 18 francs. He was very proud when he handed me this large sum, for with the 128 that we already had, this made a total of 146 francs. We only wanted 4 francs more to be able to buy the prince's cow. Forward. March. Children. With baggage strapped on our back we set forth on the road, with Capi barking and rolling in the dust for joy. Mattia suggested that we get a little more money before buying the cow. The more money we had, the better the cow, and the better the cow, the more pleased Mother Barberin would be. While tramping from Paris to Varses I had begun to give Mattia reading lessons and elementary music lessons. I continued these lessons now. Either I was not a good teacher, which was quite possible, or Mattia was not a good pupil, which also was quite possible. The lessons were not a success. Often I got angry and, shutting the book with a bang, told him that he was a thickhead. "That's true," he said, smiling, "my head is only soft when it's banged." Garofoli found out that How could one keep angry at this reply? I laughed and we went on with the lessons. But with music, from the beginning, he made astonishing progress. In the end, he so confused me with his questions, that I was obliged to confess that I could not teach him anymore. This confession mortified me exceedingly. I had been a very proud professor, and it was humiliating for me not to be able to answer my pupils' questions. And he did not spare me. Oh, no. I'd like to go and take one lesson from a real master, he said, only just one, and I'll ask him all the questions that I want answered. Why didn't you take this lesson from a real master while I was in the mine? Because I didn't want to take what he would charge out of your money. I was hurt when Mattia had spoken thus of a real master, but my absurd vanity could not hold out against his last words. You're a good boy, I said. My money is your money, you earn it also, and more than I, very often. You can take as many lessons as you like, and I'll take them with you. The master, the real master that we required, was not a villager, but an artiste, a great artiste, such as might be found only in important towns. Consulting our map, we found that the next big town was Mendez. It was already night when we reached Mendez and, as we were tired out, we decided that we could not take a lesson that evening. We asked the landlady of the inn where we could find a good music master. She said that she was very surprised that we asked such a question. Surely, we knew Monsieur Espinass's. We've come from a distance, I said. You must have come from a very great distance, then? From Italy, replied Mattia. Then she was no longer astonished, and she admitted that, coming from so far then, we might not have heard of Espinass's. Is this professor very busy? I asked, fearing that such a celebrated musician might not care to give just one lesson to two little urchins like ourselves. Oh, yes, I should say he is busy. How couldn't he be? Do you think that he would receive us tomorrow morning? Sure. He receives everyone, when they have money in their pockets, naturally. We understood that, of course. Before going to sleep, we discussed all the questions that we intended asking the celebrated professor the next day. Mattia was quite elated at our luck in finding just the kind of musician we wanted. Next morning we took our instruments, Mattia his violin and I my harp, and set out to find Espinass's. We did not take Capi, because we thought that it would not do to call on such a celebrated person with a dog. We tied him up in the inn stables. When we reached the house which our landlady indicated was the professor's, we thought that we must have made a mistake, for before the house two little brass plaques were swinging, which was certainly not the sign of a music professor. The place bore every appearance of a barber's shop. Turning to a man, who was passing, we asked him if he could direct us to Espinass's house. There it is, he said, pointing to the barber's shop. After all, why should not a professor live with a barber? We entered. The shop was partitioned off into two equal parts. On the right were brushes, combs, jars of cream, and barber's chairs. On the left, hanging on the walls and on the shelves, were various instruments, violins, cornets, trombones, etc. Monsieur Espinass's? Inquired Mattia. Fluttering like a bird, the dapper little man, who was in the act of shaving a man, replied, I am Monsieur Espinass's. I glanced at Mattia as much as to say that the barber musician was not the man we were looking for, that it would be wasting good money to consult him, but Mattia, instead of understanding my look, sat down in a chair with a deliberate air. Will you cut my hair after you have shaved the gentleman? He asked. Certainly, young man, and I'll give you a shave also, if you like. Thanks, replied Mattia. I was abashed at his assurance. He looked at me out of the corner of his eye, to ask me to wait before getting annoyed. When the man was shaved, Espinass's, with towel over his arm, prepared to cut Mattia's hair. Monsieur, said Mattia, while the barber tied the sheet round his neck, my friend and I had an argument, and as we know that you are a celebrated musician, we thought that you would give us your advice and settle the matter for us. What is it, young man? Now I knew what Mattia was driving at. First of all, he wanted to see if this barber musician was capable of replying to our questions. If so, he intended to get a music lesson at the price of a haircut. All the while Mattia was having his haircut, he asked questions. The barber musician was highly amused, but answered each question put to him quickly and with pleasure. When we were ready to leave, he asked Mattia to play something on his violin. Mattia played a piece. "And you don't know a note of music," cried the barber, clapping his hands, and looking affectionately at Mattia as though he had known and loved him all his life. "It is wonderful." Mattia took a clarinet from amongst the instruments and played on it, then a cornet. "Why, the youngster's a prodigy," cried Hector in rapture. "If you will stay here with me, I'll make you a great musician. In the mornings you shall learn to shave my customers, and the rest of the day you shall study music. Don't think, because I'm a barber, I don't know music. One has to live." I looked at Mattia. What was he going to reply? Was I to lose my friend, my chum, my brother? "Think for your own good, Mattia," I said, but my voice shook. "Leave my friend?" he cried, linking his arm in mine. "That I never could, but thank you all the same, monsieur." Hector insisted, and told Mattia that later they would find the means to send him to the Conservatoire in Paris, because he would surely be a great musician. "Leave Remi? Never." "Well, then," replied the barber, sorrowfully, "let me give you a book and you can learn what you do not know from that." He took a book out of one of the drawers, entitled, "The Theory of Music." It was old and torn, but what did that matter? Taking a pen, he sat down and wrote on the first page. "To a child who, when he becomes celebrated, will remember the barber of Mendes." I don't know if there were any other professors of music at Mendes, but that was the only one we knew, and we never forgot him.